into that smoldering pit, I knew I had to write this book. I knew the American people had to understand why there's so much anger and hatred in the world. This isn't to condone mass murder in any way or what happened at the World Trade Center, but it is to say I knew the American people needed to know my story. And so I decided to write the book, but this time I committed to writing it without talking to anybody else, without letting anyone know, including my wife and daughter, what I was writing about, until the manuscript was completed in the hands of my agent and he'd sent it out to a bunch of publishers. At that point it becomes my best insurance policy, because every jackal knows that to kill me at this point at time would mean the sales of that book would skyrocket even more. It's sold many copies now, but it would sell many, many more, and it would sell them to a much larger public if something dire happened to me. So that's the worst thing they want to see happen. So the book became my insurance policy, and I planned it that way. It is at this point a very good insurance policy.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say.
As to the statement.
Yeah, go on. The statement. Yeah, your response.
The State Department. I found it very interesting that I'm not sure whether this is still true or not, but for a while I was the only book and author on the State Department website, and you know it's interesting what they said about the National Security Agency not recreating. I mean, they could go back into their own records. I was interviewed at the JFK building in Boston. I'm sure it's in the records someplace. But for them to say, and they said on this, that the National Security Agency doesn't do these things. All it does is cryptography, encoding and decoding messages. Well, we all know today that the NSA has been eavesdropping, wiretapping Americans here in this country. We know they've been involved in many, many other things. They're a highly secretive agency, and it really struck me as odd that the State Department would have the gall to come up and say some of the things it said on that website. And ironically, it served to sell many more copies of my book.
Well, John, you know, on your new book, The Secret History of the American Empire, let me get a quote in here. When you'd been on a disastrous camping trip and not really paid attention to the weather, you wrote, "As an EHM, Economic Hitman, I had found it equally as easy to ignore the facts behind the myth of my job. I was creating an empire rather than making the world a saner, safer, more compassionate place, serving the corporatocracy instead of solving the problems of poverty." Now, when it comes to the situation, you know, poverty and the issues that the organizations like the World Bank and IMF are supposed to be looking after, surely this pattern can be more visible and people can see that there is no positive result for these countries. Surely there should be some kind of greater backlash than someone writing a book about it.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? The evidence is all very clear there that most Americans tend to think that foreign aid really goes to helping poor people. Very little of it does. A little bit does, but most of it goes to helping big American corporations and to creating this empire. And the facts are all there if anybody really cares to look. It's, again, if you go back to that State Department website where they criticize me and talk about the fact that the United States is forgiving debt. The fact of the matter is the United States is not forgiving debt except with tremendous strings attached, what we call conditionalities. So we have offered to some of these countries conditionalities provided they allow us to do things like send in our corporations to privatize their water systems and their sewage systems and their utility companies and many other things. I mean, how would we owe a lot of money. How would we like it if the Chinese said, we'll forgive your debts, but we want to own all your utility companies. We want our private corporations to own your utility companies. Those are the kind of conditions that we apply to this debt forgiveness, which is, in fact, part of this essence of taking over, of empire building, of saying, you know, give us your resources and we'll drop your debts. So the whole debt forgiveness thing and the whole idea of altruistic foreign aid is unfortunately a lie. I'd like to see true debt forgiveness. I'd like to see the United States truly reach out and take care of people, help the starving and the suffering of the world. If we truly want to end terrorism, if we truly want to end violence in the world, the way to do it is not by sending armies out to Iraq or anywhere else. It is, in fact, to get rid of the root causes of anger and disappointment and frustration and terror, and that is starvation, it's poverty, it's exploitation of resources. We need to get rid of those things, and I think this is something we should really dedicate ourselves to doing.
John, in your new book, you also say, here's a quote, one final time for one more quote here. It says, this is on blaming, the problems around the world. Washington denied culpability for its failures. The newspapers, magazines and airwaves were flooded with reports that blamed corrupt foreign government officials, religious fanaticism and left-wing dictators for all the problems. That suggests to some degree the media hasn't really got a grip on what's going on there, that the media hasn't really fully understood the mechanism that drives this secret American empire.
Well, the media doesn't want to understand. I think there are a lot of reporters out there who do understand, but their true stories don't get published because, let's face it, the media in the United States is, for the most part, either owned directly by the corporatocracy or funded by it through advertising. Tremendous control over the media. I recently was traveling with a reporter from a major U.S. newspaper, and I said, why are you people not reporting on what's really going on in Latin America, the real story behind it? And Evo Morales and Rafael Correa of Ecuador. I can go down to Latin America and I can write the real story. I'm told that there's no censorship on my writing, but the fact of the matter is it won't be published unless an editor wants to publish it. And I'm very aware of that. And if my stories don't get published, I lose my job. And so a lot of these guys do understand what's going on, but the advertisers and the people that own mainstream media in the United States don't want that message to get out.
John, what are you up to now then in terms of, you've written two sort of very powerful books. The content is quite fascinating because it's very detailed, obviously, the stories that you're telling from personal experience. What's the next step for you? What other information do you have that you want to get out there?
Well, I'm traveling around a great deal talking in many different venues, but I like particularly to talk to universities and colleges and really reach out to young people. And in the process, I also try to get together with small groups of them for dinners and lunches and so on, and hear what they're thinking and what their questions are. And that's helping to shape me to understand more what I need to do. I'm writing a couple more books right now. I'm doing a lot of speaking. I just had a grandson. He's now 2 months old as of yesterday.
Congratulations.
This is a tremendous, thank you. It's a tremendous responsibility. I know that my grandson can't possibly hope to inherit a stable, peaceful, and sustainable world unless every child growing up in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America has that same expectation. We are a very small world today, unlike even when I was an economic hitman in the 70s. Today, we're truly a small world. We're very, very interdependent. Right. People in the United States must understand that we cannot have homeland security here until we realize that the whole world is our homeland.
John, well, we have to say thank you very much, and I'm glad we're talking to a former economic hitman. Thanks very much for being with us.